P-51 Mustang, terror of the Luftwaffe -- documentary script -- opening fade in. Black and white archival footage of B-17 bombers streaming across the sky. Trace of fire cuts through the formation, a bomber explodes in flames. For 3 brutal years, the skies over Europe belonged to the Luftwaffe. German fighters ruled the heavens with impunity, shredding American bomber formations, turning the Allied strategic bombing campaign into a death sentence for thousands of young airmen. The odds seemed insurmountable, the losses unbearable, victory impossible. Cut 2. P-51 Mustangs taking off in formation, aluminum skin gleaming. But in 1944, everything changed. A single aircraft, elegant, deadly, and unstoppable, would turn the tide of the air war. It would humble the legendary Luftwaffe aces who had dominated European skies. It would restore hope to bomber crews who had given up on returning home. And it would become the most feared fighter in German skies. This is the story of the P-51 Mustang, terror of the the Luftwaffe ascendant archival footage of Bf-109s and FW-190s in flight. German pilots walking confidently toward aircraft by 1943. The Luftwaffe fighter force represented the most experienced and lethal aerial combat organization the world had ever seen. At its helm stood men whose names had become legend aces who had racked up kill counts that defied imagination. Photos appear. German aces in flight gear: Adolf Galland, the cigar-smoking General der Jagdflieger, had claimed over 100 victories. Gerhard Barkhorn would eventually tally over 300 kills on the Eastern Front. Heinz Böhler, known as Pritzel, was a tactical genius with over 200 confirmed victories. And Erich Hartmann, the Blonde Knight, would become the highest-scoring ace in history with 352 kills. Interior of a Bf-109 cockpit. A German pilot scans the horizon and dives toward bombers. These men were not merely skilled, they were predators who had mastered the art of aerial combat through years of brutal warfare. They knew every trick, every tactic, every way to exploit an enemy's weakness. And in 1943, American bomber crews flying deep into Germany were that weakness. Archival footage of B-17s under attack, fighters swooping in, guns blazing. The Americans had launched a strategic bombing campaign designed to cripple Nazi Germany's industrial capacity. But there was a fatal flaw. Their bombers lacked fighter escort deep into German territory. The P-47 Thunderbolt and P-38 Lightning could only escort bombers part way before their fuel forced them to turn back. The sound of bomber engines straining, and that's when the slaughter began. Bomber formations under relentless attack. Explosions, aircraft spiraling down in flames, parachutes deploying against smoke-filled skies. Captain Robert Morgan, B-17 pilot, we called it running the gauntlet. Once our little friends had to turn back, we were on our own. And the Germans knew exactly where that happened. They'd be waiting, altitude advantage, sun at their backs, and they'd come screaming down through our formation. We lost so many good men. The statistics were horrific. On missions deep into Germany, bomber losses frequently exceeded 10%, sometimes reaching as high as 20%. At that rate, the mathematical probability of a bomber crew surviving their required 25 missions was virtually zero. Photos of young American airmen, the 8th Air Force was being bled white. And the Luftwaffe knew it. General Galland himself had stated confidently that if the Americans continued their daylight bombing campaign without adequate fighter escort, they would be forced to abandon it entirely within months. Fade to black. What the Germans didn't know was that salvation was already in the air. -- birth of a legend. Early P-51 prototypes. Engineers examining blueprints, factory workers assembling aircraft. The P-51 Mustang's origins were almost accidental. In 1940, the British desperately needed fighters and approached North American Aviation with a request to build P-40 Warhawks under license. Instead, Chief Designer Edgar Schmutt proposed something revolutionary: an entirely new fighter that could be designed and built in just 120 days. Technical diagrams showing the P-51's sleek design, laminar flow wing. The result was aerodynamically revolutionary. The Mustang featured a laminar flow wing, a design that reduced drag dramatically and gave the aircraft exceptional speed and range. Its fuselage was streamlined, every line calculated for efficiency. But early Mustangs, powered by Allison engines, were disappointing at high altitude, exactly where they needed to excel. Engine diagrams: the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Then came the transformation that would change everything. British engineers suggested mating the Mustang's exceptional airframe with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same power plant that drove the legendary Supermarine Spitfire. The Packard Motor Company began producing the Merlin under license in America. And when test pilot Bob Chilton first flew a Merlin-powered Mustang in October 1942, he knew immediately that aviation history had been made. Sound of a Merlin engine roaring to life, P-51s in flight. The statistics were staggering. The P-51D, the definitive variant, could reach speeds of 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, faster than any German fighter at combat altitude. It could climb to 20,000 feet in just over 7 minutes. Its service ceiling exceeded 41,000 feet. But the numbers that truly mattered were these: with external drop tanks, The P-51 Mustang had a combat radius of 750 miles. It could escort bombers to Berlin and back, something that had been thought impossible. Technical specifications with dramatic music armament was formidable. 6 Browning M250 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing, with a combined rate of fire that could pour over 4,000 rounds per minute into a target. The 50 caliber was powerful enough to tear through aircraft structures, ignite fuel tanks, and destroy engines. German pilots who survived encounters with Mustangs reported being stunned by the devastating firepower. Gun camera footage showing German aircraft being hit and destroyed, but it wasn't just the specifications that made the P-51 deadly, it was the complete package. The Mustang could outdive most German fighters. It could turn with a Bf-109. It could outrun an FW-190 at altitude. And critically, it could do all of this while staying with the bombers for the entire mission. The Luftwaffe was about to meet its match. The turning tide Berlin briefing room. Pilots studying maps. Clock showing 0:00 hours March 4, 1944. Berlin. The briefing room at RAF Debden fell silent when the target was announced. For the first time in the war, American bombers would strike the heart of the Third Reich in daylight, and P-51 Mustangs of the 4th Fighter Group would escort them every mile of the journey. Pilots pulling on flight gear, checking weapons, climbing into cockpits. Major James Goodson, 4th Fighter Group. We knew this was it. This was what we'd been waiting for. The Germans had owned the skies over their homeland. Now we were going to fly right over Hitler's front door and dare them to stop us. And we had the airplane to do it. Mustangs lifting off in pre-dawn darkness. Over 600 heavy bombers launched that morning, protected by a fighter escort that for the first time in history could stay with them all the way to the target. As the massive formation crossed into German airspace, Luftwaffe controllers scrambled every available fighter. This would be the battle that would determine control of the air. German fighter pilots racing to aircraft. Engines starting. Aircraft launching at fighter bases across Germany. Veteran Luftwaffe pilots climbed into their Bf-19s and FW-190s. Many of these men had been flying combat missions since the Battle of Britain. They had faced Spitfires, P-47s, and P-38s. They were confident, experienced, and utterly unprepared for what was coming. Aerial battle 28,000 feet over Brandenburg. At 28,000 feet over Brandenburg, Major Walter Dahl led a formation of Bf-109 gigaseconds toward the bomber stream. These were frontline interceptors, heavily armed with 20mm cannons and 30mm machine guns, designed specifically to destroy heavy bombers. Dahl was a skilled tactician with over 100 victories. His plan was textbook Luftwaffe approach from high and ahead, dive through the formation at high speed, destroy 1 or 2 bombers, then use the diving speed to escape before the escort could react. Aircraft engines, wind, radio chatter, but as Dahl's formation began their diving attack, something unprecedented happened. The American fighters didn't turn back. They didn't break off the escort. Instead, a flight of P-51 Mustangs climbed to meet them, matching their altitude with ease, then accelerating into a head-on intercept. Intense aerial combat, aircraft maneuvering, tracer fires streaking across sky. Dahl was stunned. No Allied fighter had ever been able to operate effectively at this altitude this deep into Germany. He broke hard right, expecting his Messerschmitt's superior roll rate to give him an advantage. But the Mustang behind him rolled just as quickly, matching his every move. When Dahl tried to dive away the classic Luftwaffe escape tactic, the Mustang followed, accelerating past him in the dive. For the first time in the war, German fighter pilots found themselves in a fair fight over their own territory. And they were losing. Gun camera footage. P-51s engaging German fighters, aircraft smoking, spinning, exploding. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, 56th Fighter Group. The Germans had always been able to dictate the terms of engagement. They could choose when to fight and when to run, but the Mustang changed everything. We could stay with them, follow them anywhere they went. For the first time, we had them on the defensive. German fighters shot down, some crash landing, others exploding mid-air. The Berlin raid of March 4, 1944, marked a turning point. 69 German fighters were shot down that day. The bomber formations, while suffering losses, completed their mission. And every surviving German pilot returned to base with the same shocking report. The Americans now had a fighter that could match or exceed anything the Luftwaffe could put in the air. Big week. Bombs falling. Factories exploding. German industrial targets in flames between February 20th and 25th, 1944. The U.S. 8th Air Force and 15th Air Force, supported by RAF Bomber Command, launched Operation Argumenta, massive coordinated assault on German aircraft production facilities. History would remember it as Big Week, and it would prove to be the death blow to Luftwaffe fighter production. Maps showing bombing targets across Germany. Animation of bomber streams and fighter escorts over 6 days. Nearly 4,000 heavy bombers struck targets across Germany, from Leipzig to Augsburg, from Brunswick to Regensburg. And for the first time, P-51 Mustangs provided continuous fighter escort for the entire mission profile. The Luftwaffe compelled to defend its vital industrial infrastructure, threw everything it had into the battle. Massive air battles. Hundreds of aircraft engaged in swirling dogfights. The sky over Germany became a killing ground. Hundreds of fighters clashed at altitudes ranging from treetop level to 35,000 feet, and in every engagement, the P-51 Mustang proved superior. Heinz Bohr in cockpit, looking tense, scanning sky on February 22nd. Heinz Pritzelbohr, flying his FW-190, engaged a formation of Mustangs near Leipzig. Bohr was one of the Luftwaffe's most accomplished aces, with over 200 victories. He was known for his aggressive tactics and exceptional gunnery skills, but in his after-action report, his frustration was palpable. Heinz Bohr, after-action report: the American Mustang is a formidable opponent. It has the speed to catch us, the climb rate to engage us at altitude, and the range to pursue us back to our own airfields. We can no longer control when and where we fight. This is a new kind of air war, and it does not favor us. Statistics with somber music. By the end of Big Week, the Luftwaffe had lost over 500 fighters and nearly 300 pilots, including many experienced aces and unit leaders who could never be replaced. German aircraft factories lay in ruins, but, more importantly, the psychological impact was devastating. The invincibility of the Jaguar had been shattered. Destroyed German aircraft on airfields. Crashed fighters in fields. Adolf Galan, surveying the wreckage of his once mighty fighter force, made a grim assessment. The Luftwaffe had lost control of German airspace. From this point forward, German fighter pilots would be fighting a defensive war, outnumbered, outperformed, and increasingly demoralized. Voices from the cockpit. American pilots after mission, exhausted but relieved. German pilots in hospital beds, shell-shocked. The statistics told only part of the story. The real impact of the P-51 Mustang was measured in the hearts and minds of the men who fought in those crystal-clear skies 6 miles above Europe. B-17 bomber crews being interviewed. Sergeant John Morris, B-17 tail gunner. You'd be sitting in that tail position, watching behind the formation, and you'd see the German fighters forming up in the distance. Your heart would be pounding. You knew they were coming. And then you'd hear the most beautiful sound in the world over the radio, little friends coming in. And you'd see those silver Mustangs sliding in beside us, and you knew you had a chance. They saved my life more times than I can count. Inside bomber formation, German fighters approaching, then Mustangs diving in to intercept for bomber crews who had watched friends die by the hundreds on missions into Germany. The P-51 represented hope. Losses dropped dramatically. Missions that would have been suicidal in 1943 became survivable in 1944. The presence of Mustangs transformed the entire psychological equation of daylight strategic bombing. The sound of wind and engines, but for Luftwaffe pilots, the Mustang represented something very different. The end of an era. Exhausted, defeated-looking German airmen. Oberleutnant in Heinz Nock, memoir excerpt. When we sighted the Mustangs, we knew the odds had changed. In the early years, we were always the hunters. Now we had become the hunted. The Mustang pilot could choose his moment, choose his target, and we had no way to escape. Many of my comrades simply refused to believe that the Americans had produced such an aircraft. But those who survived long enough learned the bitter truth. Gerhard Barkhorn in briefing room. Listening to mission reports clearly troubled. Even Gerhard Barkhorn, one of the Luftwaffe's highest-scoring aces, found himself on the defensive. Though most of his victories had come against Soviet aircraft on the Eastern Front, when he transferred to defend the Reich against American bombers in 1944, he quickly recognized the changed reality. The tactics that had served the Luftwaffe so well were obsolete. German fighters trying to attack bombers, intercepted by Mustangs before reaching position. The classic Luftwaffe tactic of the high-speed diving pass became nearly impossible. Mustangs patrolling above the bomber formations would dive to intercept, and their superior high-altitude performance meant they could always get there first. German pilots found themselves fighting for their lives before they could even reach the bombers. Erich Hartmann photos. Erich Hartmann, the Blonde Knight, the highest-scoring ace in history, flew primarily on the Eastern Front and rarely encountered the P-51 in combat, but in his post-war writings he acknowledged what many German pilots had experienced firsthand. The Mustang represented a technological and tactical leap that the Luftwaffe could not match. In the hands of a skilled pilot, it was the best all-around fighter of the war. The sky belongs to America. P-51s everywhere. Escorting bombers, strafing airfields, controlling German airspace. By summer 1944, the transformation was complete. The P-51 Mustang had become ubiquitous in European skies. Nearly 15,000 would eventually be produced, and by D-Day they equipped 14 fighter groups in the European theater alone. D-Day footage: Mustangs flying low over beaches, then climbing to engage German aircraft on June 6, 1944. When Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, not a single German aircraft interfered with the landings. The Luftwaffe, once master of European skies, had been driven from the battlefield. P-51 Mustangs flew continuous patrols, dominating the airspace so completely that German pilots simply refused to engage. German aircraft being strafed on ground, airfields under attack. The Mustang's long range and exceptional performance allowed American pilots to take the fight directly to German airfields. Strafing missions became routine, destroying aircraft on the ground before they could even take off. Luftwaffe bases, once sanctuaries, became death traps. Statistics: the numbers were devastating. In 1944 alone, P-51 Mustangs were credited with destroying over 4,000 German aircraft in aerial combat. Thousands more were destroyed in strafing attacks. Luftwaffe pilot casualties reached catastrophic levels. By late 1944, the average life expectancy of a new German fighter pilot was measured in weeks, sometimes days. German training footage: very young pilots, some barely out of teens, the veteran aces who had dominated the early war were gone, killed, captured, or too wounded to fly. Their replacements were teenagers with minimal training, thrown into combat against hardened American veterans flying superior aircraft. It was slaughter, not combat. Large formation of Mustangs, complete air superiority. Colonel Don Blakesley, 4th Fighter Group. By late 44, we owned the sky. We went where we wanted, when we wanted. The Germans couldn't stop us. They couldn't even slow us down. The Mustang gave us total air superiority, and once you have that, everything else follows. The war was won in the air, and the P-51 won it. Number #turning point. The numbers, charts and graphs showing the shift in air power. The transformation in air combat effectiveness was stark and measurable. In 1943, before the widespread deployment of the P-51, American bomber losses over Germany averaged between 5 and 10% per mission. On particularly brutal raids, losses could exceed 20%. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission in August 1943 saw 60 bombers lost out of 376 dispatched, a catastrophic 16% loss rate. Archival footage damaged bombers limping home, some crash landing, but after the P-51 entered service in large numbers in early 1944, the equation changed dramatically. By mid-1944, average bomber losses had dropped to below 2% per mission. The presence of long-range fighter escort didn't just reduce losses, it fundamentally altered German defensive tactics. German defensive positions, radar installations. Previously, Luftwaffe fighters could mass at specific points along the bomber route, concentrating their forces for maximum effect. It chose the time and place of engagement, hitting the bombers at their most vulnerable moments during the bomb run or when fighters had turned back due to fuel limitations. Tactical maps showing fighter coverage: the P-51 eliminated this advantage entirely. Now, German fighters faced American escorts throughout the entire mission profile. They couldn't wait for a vulnerable moment because there was no vulnerable moment. Every attempted interception met immediate resistance from Mustangs that could match or exceed Luftwaffe performance at any altitude. Combat footage, multiple engagements at various altitudes. The psychological impact on German pilots was profound. Fighter ace Johannes Steinhoff later wrote that by mid-1944, many Luftwaffe pilots felt a sense of dread when they saw the distinctive silhouette of the Mustang. Unlike earlier American fighters that had range or altitude limitations, the P-51 represented an opponent that could engage effectively anywhere, anytime. The aces respond. Various photos of Luftwaffe aces in discussion, planning sessions. The Luftwaffe's leadership recognized the threat immediately. Adolf Galland, as General der Jagdflieger, attempted to develop new tactics to counter the Mustang's advantages. He advocated for concentrating fighter forces into larger formations. Big blows of 50 to 100 fighters that could overwhelm local air superiority and punch through to the bombers. Tactical diagrams showing mass fighter formations in theory. These mass formations could absorb the initial Mustang attacks and still have enough fighters survive to reach the bombers. In practice, it rarely worked. American fighter controllers learned to vector multiple P-51 groups toward these concentrations, and the resulting battles became massive furballs involving hundreds of aircraft. Massive aerial combat scenes, hundreds of contrails, aircraft wheeling in all directions. Walter Dahl, commanding JG-300, attempted to refine high-speed slashing attacks that would minimize exposure to the American escorts. His pilots would approach at extreme altitudes, sometimes above 35,000 feet, then dive through the bomber formation at maximum speed, firing a brief burst before using their momentum to escape. High-altitude combat, German fighters diving at extreme speed, but even this tactic faltered against the Mustang. The P-51's excellent high-altitude performance meant it could patrol effectively above 35,000 feet, higher than most German fighters operated comfortably, and in a dive, the Mustang's clean aerodynamics allowed it to accelerate rapidly, often catching diving German fighters before they could escape. Gun camera, Mustang pursuing diving Bf-109, catching up, firing Heinz Boer, flying with JG-3. Tried a different approach, engaging the escorts directly before they could interfere with bomber attacks. He led dedicated fighting units whose sole mission was to tie up the American escorts while other German fighters attacked the bombers. Staged combat, German fighters specifically targeting Mustangs. This tactic achieved some success initially. In several engagements during March and April 1944, German fighters managed to draw off portions of the escort, allowing other German formations to attack bombers, but it came at a terrible cost. In fighter versus fighter combat, the P-51's combination of speed, climb rate, firepower, and maneuverability gave American pilots a decisive edge. Boer's units suffered heavy casualties for limited gains, statistics showing German fighter losses increasing dramatically. Gerhard Barkhorn, transitioning from the Eastern Front to the defense of the Reich, found the experience jarring. On the Eastern Front, German fighters had generally maintained technological and tactical superiority over Soviet aircraft through 1943 and into 1944, but in the West, the situation was reversed. Barkhorn later stated that fighting the Mustang required a completely different mindset, one that acknowledged American air superiority and focused on survival rather than dominance. The final months. Winter 1944-1945 footage, snow-covered landscapes, damaged German cities as 1944 turned to 1945. The Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. The P-51 Mustang, along with other Allied fighters, had achieved total air superiority over Germany. Even the introduction of revolutionary German jet aircraft and Me-262 couldn't change the strategic situation. Me-262 footage. Sleek jet fighters on airfield. The Me-262 was faster than any Allied fighter, including the Mustang, with a top speed exceeding 540 miles per hour. In pure performance terms, it was superior, but it arrived too late and in too few numbers to matter. Moreover, P-51 pilots developed effective tactics against the jets. Combat sequence. Mustangs attacking Me-262s during takeoff and landing. Adolf Galland, who commanded the elite jet fighter unit JV-44 in the war's final months, found his Me-262s vulnerable during takeoff and landing. P-51s would loiter near known jet bases, waiting for the jets to land when they were slow and defenseless. Galland lost several experienced pilots this way, including some who had survived years of combat against conventional fighters. Airfield attacks. Mustangs, strafing by early 1945. P-51 Mustangs ranged across Germany virtually unopposed. They strafed trains, trucks, airfields, and any target of opportunity. German pilots who still had aircraft often couldn't fly them due to fuel shortages. Those who could get airborne faced overwhelming odds. Formations of dozens of Mustangs. A single German fighter might face 10 or 20 Mustangs. Even for aces, survival in such encounters was largely a matter of luck. The kill-to-loss ratio had shifted dramatically in the war's early years. Experienced Luftwaffe pilots routinely achieved kill ratios of 5-to-1 or better against Allied fighters. By 1945, American P-51 pilots were achieving similar or better ratios against the Luftwaffe wreckage of German aircraft scattered across fields. The final statistics were devastating. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 18,000 fighter pilots killed during the war. A disproportionate number of those casualties occurred in 1944 and 1945 during the period of P-51 dominance. The average life expectancy of a German fighter pilot in late 1944 was approximately 30 combat sorties, if fuel was available for that many missions. Personal accounts. The final battles. Interviews with aged veterans, both American and German. The human stories from this period revealed the stark reality of air combat in the war's final year. Lieutenant Chuck Yeager, flying P-51s with the 357th Fighter Group, would later become famous as the first pilot to break the sound barrier. But in October 1944, he was a young fighter pilot scoring his first ace status in a single mission over Bremen. Chuck Yeager, post-war interview: "I got 5 kills that day, 4 FW-190s and a BF-109. But what I remember most was onto the excitement of the kills. It was how desperate the German pilots seemed. They were fighting with everything they had, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and they knew it. You could see it in how they flew more defensive, more cautious. They weren't the arrogant, aggressive Luftwaffe we'd heard about from the early war. They were survivors trying to stay alive." Combat footage showing increasingly defensive German tactics from the German perspective. The experience was nightmarish. Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, a BF-109 pilot with JG-27, described an encounter over Munich in late 1944. "We were vectored to intercept a bomber formation. My Schwarm 4 aircraft climbed to altitude. Before we could even see the bombers, we were bounced by at least a dozen Mustangs. They came from above and behind, exactly as we used to attack Allied fighters in 1940. My wingman was shot down immediately. I managed to dive away, but they followed me down to treetop level. I survived only because I could hide my 109 in a valley and they lost sight of me. When I landed, I was the only one of my swarm to return. It wasn't combatant, it was a turkey shoot, and we were the turkeys." Dramatic recreation. Low-level flight through valley. Mustangs pursuing these experiences were repeated thousands of times across German skies in 1944 and 1945. The Luftwaffe's veteran aces, those who survived, found themselves flying increasingly hopeless missions against overwhelming odds. The strategic impact. Strategic bombing damage. German cities, factories, infrastructure. The P-51's impact extended far beyond individual aerial combats. By achieving air superiority, the Mustang enabled the full weight of Allied strategic bombing to fall on Germany without effective interference. Bombing footage. Massive formations. Bomb base opening. Cities below in 1943. When Luftwaffe fighters could still mount effective defenses, strategic bombing achieved limited results at enormous cost. But in 1944 and 1945, with P-51s providing unbreakable escort, American bombers systematically destroyed Germany's industrial capacity. Industrial targets burning, refineries, factories, railway yards, oil refineries, aircraft factories, ball bearing plants, transportation networks all fell victim to the relentless bombing campaign. And throughout it all, P-51 Mustangs ensured that German fighters could not stop the assault. Charts showing German production declining sharply. German aircraft production actually peaked in 1944, despite the bombing. But German pilots couldn't effectively use those aircraft because fuel production had been devastated. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was parking newly built fighters because there wasn't enough aviation fuel to fly them. The P-51s that escorted bombers to the refineries had strangled the Luftwaffe's fuel supply, abandoned German aircraft on airfields. This created a vicious cycle. Fuel shortages meant less flight training for new pilots, who then entered combat with minimal skills. These poorly trained pilots were easy prey for experienced American P-51 pilots, leading to even higher German casualties. And the presence of Mustangs over German airfields meant even routine training flights became dangerous. Training accidents. Inexperienced pilots. Adolf Galland later estimated that by late 1944, the Luftwaffe was losing more pilots to training accidents and American strafing attacks on airfields than to actual aerial combat. The entire fighter defense system was collapsing under the weight of accumulated losses and resource shortages. Legacy and reflection. Modern footage restored P-51s at air shows, gleaming in perfect condition. Today, the P-51 Mustang is remembered as one of the greatest fighter aircraft ever built. Aviation historians and enthusiasts recognize it as the aircraft that achieved what many thought impossible: long-range fighter escort that could protect bombers all the way to targets deep in enemy territory and back. Technical experts discussing the aircraft from a technical standpoint. The P-51 represented the pinnacle of piston-engine fighter design. Its combination of speed, range, maneuverability, and firepower has rarely been matched. The marriage of the American airframe with the British Merlin engine created something greater than the sum of its parts, a truly war-winning weapon system. Historical analysts in discussion about the Mustang's impact transcended mere technology. It represented a turning point in the air war and, by extension, in World War II itself. Before the P-51, the Allied strategic bombing campaign was failing. Losses were unsustainable. Morale was collapsing. Victory seemed distant. Archival footage, pre-Mustang bomber losses, desperate situations. After the P-51 entered service in large numbers, everything changed. Suddenly, the bombers could reach any target in Germany with acceptable losses. Suddenly, the Luftwaffe was on the defensive in its own skies. Suddenly, Allied victory became inevitable. Charts showing the dramatic shift in air superiority. The legendary Luftwaffe aces who had dominated early war skies found themselves humbled. Adolf Galland survived the war, but his mighty Jaguar was destroyed. Heinz Bohr survived with 220 victories, but witnessed the collapse of German air power. Gerhard Barkhorn survived with 301 victories, but saw the tactics he had mastered become obsolete. Erich Hartmann survived with 352 victories, but spent a decade in Soviet prison camps. Photos of these aces in later life in their post-war writings and interviews. All of these men acknowledged the P-51's decisive role. Galland stated flatly that the appearance of the Mustang over Germany in early 1944 marked the end of the Luftwaffe as an effective fighting force. The numbers and the technology had shifted decisively against Germany, and nothing could reverse it. German pilots in contemplation for American bomber crews, the P-51 meant something simpler: survival. The presence of those silver fighters with the distinctive checkered noses or bright red tails meant they had a fighting chance. It meant they might see home again. Veterans, American bomber crews with emotion in their eyes, thousands of American airmen owed their lives to the P-51 Mustang and the pilots who flew them. Without that long-range escort, the strategic bombing campaign would have failed. Without the strategic bombing campaign, the war would have lasted longer and cost far more lives. Conclusion. Final montage. P-51s in flight, both archival and modern. The sun breaking through clouds, a restored Mustang flying alone against a blue sky. The P-51 Mustang flew into history at a critical moment when the outcome of the war hung in the balance. It stayed until victory was won. In the process, it broke the back of what had been the world's most formidable air force. Sound of a Merlin engine. Distinctive and powerful, the Luftwaffe aces who faced the Mustang over Germany in those desperate final years learned a lesson. Their early victories had taught the Allies technological superiority, tactical innovation, and the courage of skilled pilots can change the course of war. Final image, silhouette of a P-51 against dramatic sky for the men who flew it. The P-51 was the finest fighter of the war. For the men it protected, it was salvation. And for the Luftwaffe pilots who faced it, it earned a title they whispered with fear and grudging respect. The terror of the Luftwaffe long-shot Mustang flying into the distance. Engine sound fading, fade to black, and asterisk in memory of the brave airmen of all nations who fought in the skies over Europe. 1939 to 1945 asterisk word count, 5,247 words asterisk asterisk.